is the Emotion Connection, where you'll experience health through feeling. Explore emotion from a different perspective and learn to use your emotions to improve your day-to-day life. Introducing your host, speaker, author, mentor, and creator of emotional strength, Sharon Faye. Sharon heads up a successful business empowering leaders to bring about organizational development and cultural change. Get your senses ready as we delve into the many facets of emotion together. Over to Sharon.
Hello, I'm Sharon Faye. Emotion is my thing. Today's podcast is about identifying underlying assumptions. And the structure of today's podcast is, what are underlying assumptions? And what are your underlying assumptions? How do you identify your underlying assumptions? And how can you change assumptions that are no longer helpful? It's an interesting topic, underlying assumptions, because we do have some assumptions that we are conscious of, but underlying assumptions are usually unconscious. And the reason we're interested in underlying assumptions is because it does affect your life. It does dominate sometimes the language you use, your behaviour, the types of beliefs that you have. So most people don't know that the way you see the world is based on your historical family of origin assumptions. You know, the truths about your family, the family stories. And you can always hear truths or assumptions by listening to family stories. And family stories are quite fascinating, not because they're the truth or not because that's what happened, but because of the assumptions that people are making about these stories. So a family story might be the truth. It's the truth that you were good at sport and your sister was good at school. The implication of this assumption is that the child who was good at sport is not that intelligent, and the sibling who was good at school is intelligent. So what happens? Well, one sibling grows up believing that he's only good at sport and struggles with schoolwork. As a result, his direction in life is impacted by pursuing a career in football, because that is what is assumed he is good at. And I'm here to tell you right now that that is not the truth. The child who is assumed to be talented at sport can also do extremely well at school, but he believes the truth about himself, as it's told through family stories, and of course, this truth makes it harder for him to learn. This family assumption can determine the child's direction in life, unless it's challenged. So as a child grows up and becomes an adult, he may want to change his lens, he may want to challenge this assumption, and he may want to challenge this truth. Then it's a lot easier for him to demonstrate his talent at sport and his talent at school, because it's not one or the other, it can be both. So you can become a myth buster by challenging your family assumptions. That'd be fun. That this is a great pastime or hobby, being a myth buster. And if your family assumptions are not helpful, you can change them by changing your lens on yourself or any other topic that you choose. But it's fun to do it with yourself first. So what are your underlying assumptions? Well, first of all, you don't know about them because it's just the way it is. life is just that way and that's just the way I am. But an example from my life is that I grew up believing I had a learning disability. Now, I believed that when I bombed out of a mandatory intelligence test in Year 7, that result must have been really bad. And that became the truth about me. And that truth was validated by my abusive mother, who always saying how dumb I was. And these assumptions determined my experience of life, and I ended up on the street at 14 years old. This is the impact of assuming things about a young person. Now, of course, it's not the truth, but the underlying assumptions are taken as the truth and are lived like they're the truth. Fortunately, I had a lot of experiences that some of you know, and I challenged these truths and studied long and hard to become qualified. And once I spent 25 years practicing psychology, I developed myself further, and now I have taken a different path. I'm now a keynote speaker on building emotional strength in leaders and in business, and coaching in business vitality. Because when we build emotional strength in leaders, the business has this boost of energy and productivity goes through the roof. Business becomes a really great place to go to work every day, and it becomes full of energy and vitality. Another great example of challenging underlying assumptions is in the trade industry. And I've heard many times throughout my career that tradesmen went down a path of an apprenticeship when they were 14 or 15 years old because they were convinced that that's all they were good at. They were good with their hands, they weren't good at school. And we have one example at Clear Perceptions, and Phil tells his story. He assumed that he was only good with his hands, and he is very good with his hands. He can fix anything. So he took an apprenticeship as a plumber. As he challenged this view later in life, he became a business owner who employed young plumbers to help them bust the myths that they are dumb. He challenges their assumptions about their capabilities. Phil challenged his assumptions about his own capabilities and now is a very proud psychologist helping people to discover their abilities. This is an amazing story of transformation. Most of you are capable of achieving a lot more than you think. You can challenge your family assumptions about you, about your capabilities, and your capacity to achieve. You are capable of anything you want. You've got to know that. You are absolutely capable of anything that you choose. And the only limitation is what I did to myself, and the only limitation is what you believe about yourself. And I believed I was dumb, so I acted dumb. And I'm going to give you some homework on your underlying assumptions later. So you might be thinking out there, well, what do I do with this information? I don't know this thing about underlying assumptions and I don't really know anything about it. So the first step is to know that you have assumptions. That's the very first step. Because if you think that life is the way you've experienced it and that's the only way life can be, then you're making an assumption about how you are and who you are. And that's not necessarily the truth. So your underlying assumptions are, as I said before, unconscious, and you're not even aware of them. But they're there. You think it's the way life is. It's not. You may not recognise them as assumptions because they have become normal to you in your life, and you may find yourself wanting to hold on to them as the truth. You can hold on to them if they're useful, because you can make that decision if they're useful or not. And if they're no longer useful and never have been useful, you can change them. So as you're starting out in this new world of assumptions, some telltale signs that could be dominating you, you'll be able to see through language and behaviour usually. That's the first thing that we notice. So, for example, arguing with your partner, believing you are right. Now that's an assumption that you're right and your partner's wrong. And that's not the truth. You may have a point of view, you may have an opinion, you may have a judgment, you may have a criticism. There's lots of things that you may experience, but this being right is not the truth. It's just a different perspective. So when you can feel it, sometimes you can feel it in your body when you believe you are right and someone else is wrong. It's a feeling, for me, it's a feeling like, it's like a block in my chest, like it's a resistance. And that's hard to open up to another point of view when you believe you're right. So that takes some practice. Another telltale sign is feeling anxious when you wake up in the morning and then continuing to make up a story about why you're feeling anxious. And when we do that, that is an assumption that the story that you're making up is the reason you feel anxious. Not true. Underperforming at work and making up excuses or reasons instead of considering underperformance. It's a hard thing to face. I've faced that in my time too. Now, teachers are another example. They judge a student as a problem, and they do this day one. First day of a new school year. The teachers will be judging students that are bright and students that are not. And the problem with that is that they believe it's the truth about the child. Whereas how I think about a child behaving in a certain way or using certain language is I understand that the student is responding to the teacher. But if I'm the teacher and I open up as considering that there's other reasons for the student responding this way, I can't control those other reasons. So as a teacher, I want to consider how the child is responding to me, and then I can change my assumption, which changes the student's behaviour. So teachers out there, you can try this out, it really works. Another telltale sign is believing that you know your friend, your partner, it's a common one, your boss, or your child, instead of understanding that this is your perspective, it is your assumption, it is not the truth about those people. These concepts take a bit of getting used to. But once you've identified an unhelpful assumption, and you'll all have them if you're honest with yourself, just be willing to let it go. It's a feeling of softening rather than rigidly holding on to something. It's a softening of, just letting it go. You can pick it up later if you want to. It's not gone. You're just letting it go, pass through. For example, if you believe you know your partner really well, as a lot of people believe they know their partners really well, consider you may not know your partner at all. You only know what your partner has let you know. Now that's an interesting concept. You only know what your partner has let you know. Your partner will not be the same with other people. And this is how we are. We respond differently in different contexts, to different people, in a different way. And you notice that within yourself. So the next step in being able to identify your assumptions is being willing to let that assumption go and consider it's not the truth. It is your opinion, as I've said before. It's your point of view. It's a criticism, it's a judgment or a story, but it is not the truth about your partner. And then from that point, you become curious. Well, if everything I know, in inverted commas, know about my partner is not the truth, then ignite your curiosity. And imagine if you could see your partner through different eyes, through a different lens. What if you responded to your partner differently next time? What if you change your mind and start to be curious about your partner rather than being right? What if your partner was a different way? What could that be? And it's quite fun to change your assumptions, to challenge them and change them and know that you're looking through your lens, it's your perspective, it is not the truth. And what I always say is you don't need to engage in this game. What you're doing is you're choosing to change your lens, your perspective on your partner, and then see how your partner responds. I guarantee it'll be different. You won't expect it. It's a different response. When I change the way I see out of my eyes, the world changes. Try it out. It takes practice and playing around with it. It's a far better use of your time to do this kind of training for yourself than scrolling or watching TV or zoning out in some way. It's far better to be actively developing yourself because you can, not because you have to, just because you can. So to recap, I've talked about understanding what underlying assumptions mean, I've talked about identifying your underlying assumptions that dominate your life and realizing that your perspective is not the truth. And know that you can change your underlying assumptions, your perspective, your lens, anytime you want to, and it's easier than you think. So your homework this week is to identify some of your own underlying assumptions. You can tell what your underlying assumptions are by listening to your language. How you speak about the things you believe is a bit of a giveaway. The types of arguments that you have is based on your underlying assumptions. So next time you're having an argument with your partner, just quietly be aware inside yourself, what assumption am I making that's causing me to be dogmatic about this point? What assumptions am I making? Are you making an assumption that your partner is selfish and you're giving? You give more than your partner gives you? Every moment you're making assumptions. How you spend time with people who agree with your perspective. Well, this is interesting in friendship groups, right? So when adults have friendship groups, they hang out with people that agree with them. So if you're talking in your friendship group over coffee about your partner and everyone agrees, everyone gets the nod. Yes, we know that. Yes, that's what they're like. You know, all the generalizations. Then you know you're making assumptions and your friendship group is in agreement with your assumptions, and that's not good for your development. It might be fun to meet and have a gossip, but know within yourself that's not developing yourself by having people around you that agree with your assumptions, your dysfunction, your sort of unhealthy behaviour. And what do you assume about your child or your children or your parents or yourself? So there's some really deeper homework, a bit tricky. Don't expect too much of yourself. If you can just do one thing by identifying that you have assumptions, and when you're having an argument with someone, just be aware that this is not about right or wrong. This is about your assumptions. Every argument or every heated discussion will be because you're being right about your point of view and the other person's being right about their point of view. There's no truth in that argument. No one's right, no one's wrong. It's just different perspectives, different assumptions, different point of view. So if you can really own that and internalise that, that would be helpful for your homework. So the next podcast is about understanding your expectations. That's another deep conversation that we'll have, and I'll see you next time.
Well, that's a wrap. The Emotion Connection is produced by Sharon Faye and her team at sharonfaye.com. With a vision to help people feel, this is just one way we're spreading the word. Sharon Faye is an engaging speaker with a compelling message. Book her for your next conference to ensure a unique and memorable experience for your audience. We encourage you to engage with Sharon through the podcast. You can also email Sharon directly, sharon@sharonfaye.com. We'd love to hear from you. The Emotion Connection, Season 2, hosted by Sharon Faye. Visit sharonfaye.com to learn more or book Sharon for your next event. See you next time.